Well, I am delighted to be joined for another Sovereignty podcast, all the way from the US by Grant Dahl. But the question that we'll be looking at today is about the future of the United States. Grant Dahl is known as the host of the Secession Speakeasy, a very popular online podcast. And so it's a thrill and an honor to be asking the questions on this particular occasion. So welcome to the Sovereignty podcast. And just before we start, we are hopefully planning to shift positions a week or so from now. So we'll be reversing roles, and Grant will be the one asking questions. But it's certainly an honor to have you on. So welcome. Would you like to
Thank
just
you.
say a little bit, first of all, about Keep Government Local, the Secession Speakeasy, and how you got interested in this area?
Well, that's I've always been, even as a young kid, I was always very interested in my local identity. I mean, like, because I grew up during the period of the late Reagan through the first Bush, Clinton, the second Bush, and so on. And there was a lot of talk about being taking pride in being an American at that time, and I was kind of the oddball because I was like, no, no, no. I grew up in the state of Minnesota. So I don't live there anymore, but that's where I grew up. And I was always saying, I'm Minnesotan. I was like, I'm Minnesotan first. In fact, when I was in high school, I went to an international gathering in Germany, and a lot of people were bringing their flags of their different countries and stuff like that. I didn't bring the American flag. I brought the Minnesota flag, which I know got a lot of people looking at me. So I was always a big proponent of the local stuff. But then I kind of got thrust into the world thrust into the world as an adult during the financial crisis of the late 2000s, and it made me realize that there was a lot within America that was just very messed up and sick, and I began looking for solutions because I knew that as an individual I was not going to survive if I didn't find ways for myself and other people in my generation to actually thrive. And it led me through a lot of different areas. The person who was the biggest influence on me at that time was former Congressman Ron Paul, who ran for president of the United States in 2008 and 2012. And he really stressed something that spoke to me about keeping solutions local, returning power to the people. It's like, hey, you guys can figure it out. You don't need government to tell you what's going on here. And so I supported him, but obviously he didn't make it to the presidency. He didn't even make it to the nomination. So of his particular party. So I was like, okay, it was like, so so how do we fix this? I was like, and I had some friends that I'd been through with, and we were all like, for the most, we were all basically Ron Paul supporters, and we were like, okay, well, how do we fix things if we can't get our people into government? And if the people we do get into government, a lot of them don't do what we put them there to do. And we gradually came to the conclusion that the system itself had to come apart, that the system had to be disassembled because it was so far removed from what America's founding fathers had established. And to that end, so we became advocates of secession. I mean, we were not new to the secession idea. We had my main co-founder, Mr. Jason Green, and myself. We had had a professor in college who was very big on secession, had talked to us a lot about it and how secession was compatible with America's founding values. And so we began looking into that and saying, like, okay, maybe this is the right approach. And as we did so, we noticed that there was nobody really in the alternative media sphere who was addressing things from the secession perspective. And we decided, because we were big fans of following people like Tucker Carlson, Glenn Greenwald, Judge Andrew Napolitano, a lot of the alternative media sphere, we were like, well, why don't we found our own podcast where we focus on these things? And that was how Secession Speakeasy and its supplementary show from Steal the Secession AM came about, where we take the secession issues from around the world, because we realized that this wasn't an America-only problem of the elites basically running things for themselves to the detriment of the common people, and the common people's conditions were getting worse. We noticed that this was a problem in Canada, Mexico, Europe, Africa, parts of Asia, It's like, and so we were like, okay, it was like, we need to address this, the big picture, and get people used to this idea of taking back power for themselves, separating from the corrupt structures, forming power for themselves. And that was how it came about. And we really started to kick off into this around late 2022 was when we really started to get into it. And we've grown since then. And as you mentioned, we've been referenced in a few articles, like The Spectator. Newsweek also cited us, which is a big news magazine in the United States. And we've generally been seeing in around, I mean, especially around America. I can't speak for the world, obviously, but we've been seeing around America that there's been a gradual awakening from among many people that the structure itself is the problem, and that separation from the structure through secession, and taking back control of your own governance is really the long-term solution to this. It's like electing people to certain positions usually is only a temporary solution, if any solutions get done at all. And so that's kind of where we are with that. That's what's been pushing us to do
Okay.
this for so long.
So, one of the things that will be of interest to our Scottish listeners, or we won't only be from Scotland, but from listeners on the other side of the pond, is this concept of America as a nation. And really, whether Americans consider themselves to be a nation, whether American is a national identity. Because if you contrast that with state identities, for instance, I mean, some of these state identities are older even than the United States of America. The Eastern states were founded well in advance of the United States coming together. So, can we start maybe with that in a US context? What role does identity play?
Well, America, as it was originally founded, was founded as a confederation of states, because when the American founding took place, the founding fathers didn't think of themselves as American. American was just a convenient way to group people from these different states when you had to work together on something. Like General Washington talked about the term American in the army that with which he fought against the British. But that was more a term of convenience. There was no effort to like erase state identities, because Virginians were very proud of their culture. Massachusetts was very proud of their culture, South Carolina, etc. So state identity, and I think the main reason for that is because America as a nation has never been, like, I'll use this term, one ethnicity. Okay, I mean, the term that's often used to describe America is as a melting pot of different peoples, cultures, etc. I know in my own case, I've got I'm descended from 5 or 6 different ethnicities. So so you can't really use this. It's not like in Europe where you have like the Czech Republic is the country for the Czech people. Okay, it's not the same concept. Even within the states, there's really not that same concept. And so Americans don't look at the nation idea as something that that has a long history based on ethnicity, or long tradition, going back into the Middle Ages or anything like that. America looks at themselves and they say themselves like, my loyalty is to my local people, my neighbors, the place where I grew up, the state where I grew up, the area where I know these people. It's like, and that's really where the loyalty stands. So basically, America has never been one nation. There's been this mantra on the part of the elite classes and the ruling classes to try and create this artificial construct known as the American people. And there have been a couple instances within the last 50 years where they've really tried to push this concept. Like during Ronald Reagan's presidency, there was this push to use by people. Reagan didn't do this himself, but people within his presidency tried to push this concept as like, we're all one American people. It's like, you can't really do that. And there was another push to do it right after September 11th, 2001, in the aftermath of the War on Terror, to make it like, we're all one people, we're all one American people. It's like, but people, the everyday American person's like, well, no. It's like, we're not really like that, because, like, I'll use this example. You take one area of the country, the Pacific Northwest. The culture is completely different. They got high trees. They're dealing with volcanoes. It's like, and earthquakes. They're dealing with, the weather coming in off the coast. It's like they have to do things differently than, say, people in Appalachia, where they're mountain living. Okay, they have to deal with landslides. They have to deal with hurricanes. They have to deal with forest fires. They have to deal with mining. They have to deal with heavy snow and ice. Icy roads. So it's completely different. So the geography itself is actually an impediment to America as a one nation concept. America, the common people generally understand this, that America is a confederation of different peoples living in different geographic areas. I mean, if you talk to the everyday American, they understand that concept, even if they might not completely define it. But you only hear this nationality concept from the elite and ruling classes. That's usually the only place where you hear it from in America. So it should not come as a shock to a lot of people who know this about America, that if there's this effort to tyrannize too much from one particular center, in this case, Washington, D.C., that sections of the country are going to say, no, we don't want any part of that. We've got our own needs to meet, and we've got to take care of ourselves. And I know in the comment, go ahead.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it is a sort of different glue. And then as part of the, as it were, the bonds essentially that tie Montanans together, or Texans together, or Alaskans together. I mean, obviously, geography and locality plays a big part of it. But it's interesting, having watched the United States from afar, that there seems to be something else going on, which is, I don't know how it's often referred to as something like the Great Sort, where the people are choosing to become Texan because Texas better embodies their values. And they're choosing to go to California because it better embodies their values. Do you see that happening? Do you think that's a fair analysis? And what do you think the downstream impacts of that are going to be?
Could you repeat the last bit of that question? You faded out on me there.
Yeah, so sorry to repeat. Do you think that's a fair analysis, that this great sort is taking place? And what do you anticipate the downstream impacts of that to be? The
I
impacts
think,
going forward?
right. I think that that's a very accurate analysis. I mean, that great sorting, or I know some people also call it the great restructuring, that's going on, because what you're finding, and this is I'll see if I can sum this up. What you have is that uh, in a large part of America's history, there were sections that were thrown together into one state or one particular area where it was not something that was willingly agreed to. Like today, I just found something from Oregon. I'm sure you probably heard of the movement to split Oregon in half and have half of it join the state of Idaho, because the eastern section has nothing in common with the section in the Northwest, which is all hyper woke leftist. And what they shared was that they found out when Oregon was formed as a state, the eastern section didn't want to be partnered with the western section, because there was this mountain range. People who lived on the west side of the mountain range were very different from the people on the eastern side, and their needs were completely different. And so you had these artificial constructs which didn't really have a problem as long as the different areas had their needs respected at the state government or the federal government level. And if basically it's like, okay, we're not going to tell you how to live your life. It's like, you go do your thing, just make sure you pay us some tax money, as long as that was done. But now, because there's this centralization going on where they're like, we want to dictate every single aspect of it, now those fractures are becoming more apparent. And so it's becoming apparent largely in areas where there's more efforts to like dictate every single aspect of your life. So you see this like in California, Oregon, Washington State, Minnesota, Illinois, Maryland, Maine. Is like that's generally where you see more of it. You don't see as much of it in the red states, because the red states, they're just like, it's like, okay, you guys don't do your thing, we don't care, but so it kind of depends on where you are and like what the mentality is of the people who are governing that local area as to where the sorting is going to happen. In regards to states leaving, that's leaving DC. That's something that is coming about because DC is punishing the state itself. Again, it's getting away from this mentality of you do your thing, just give us a little bit of money and give us some land for military bases. It's like, or something like that. Okay, so but because there's this effort to centralize. That's what's driving the splits, because people are just saying, well, you're telling me to do this. This is not what I believe in. This actually, in many cases, directly contradicts what I believe in. So I don't want any part of that. It's like, or it's causing financial hardship to me for you to demand this of me. It's like more financial hardship, and for what? Just so these people can benefit. So, and what I see coming down the road is that I think what you're going to have, I think there's going to be a lot of state splitting going on. I think because there's no people need to understand this. Even with Donald Trump in the White House right now, there's been no effort to deviate from this course of centralization. There's just been a change of who's in charge at the top. All right, there's just been that change, nothing else. So what's going to happen, I think, is that you're probably going to see the splits within the states are going to become more apparent, and then certain states are going to defy the federal government on certain other things, and there probably will be this sort of where boundaries are going to change. There's going to be like a whirlwind of boundary changes, I believe, over the next 10 years. Exactly when that kicks off, obviously we don't know, but again, there's just this change that's just unfolding because the elite and ruling classes are not getting off this centralization train. They will not leave it, and because they won't leave it, what's going to happen.
It's fascinating for me. Trump initially, when he became better known on this side of the Atlantic as a political figure, one of the things that we pick up on is, his opposition to NAFTA, which, excuse me, sorry, it seemed at the time to be an opposition to heavier centralization in North America. Well, now what we see seems to be almost the opposite. I mean, what the Trump administration is aiming for is territorial expansion, which is unification of far more territory under the authority of DC, whether it's Panama, Greenland, even Canada. I think that may be just a rhetorical flourish. I think there's far more serious intent behind what's being expressed in the direction of Greenland. And to a lesser extent, Panama. So, in that context, how likely is it that we could see one of the states secede? And in your view, which state do you think, or which states are most likely to break first? Could it even be a left-wing state like California, in the context of a far stronger Republican government in DC? I mean, do you have any thoughts about the actual likelihood of a particular state seceding?
Well, I think what's kind of makes secession inevitable, and I've talked with a couple of different people like this. If you I had someone who has far more experience covering these things than I do, like Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. And she, along with her friend, Judge Andrew Napolitano, who also has extensive experience, they believe that's the domino that's going to fall, which then makes secession inevitable, is American debt, is the debt problem. Because that's the one thing that Trump has not taken any real steps to address. I mean, we hear about these efforts to cut waste out from the government. But you're not getting rid of these functions which are leading to this debt, which are leading to this waste. It's like you're not really doing anything on that front. So that's why I know when he first started talking about Greenland and Panama, I was talking with some of my some other people in the groups that I hang out with who are also pro-secession, and the question we kept asking was like, how are we going to pay for that? It's like, you're going to have to shell out money for Greenland and Panama Canal. It's like, how are we going to pay for it? We're 36, what is it, billion or trillion in debt? No,
Trillion.
It's like there's no. So so that's a huge problem. So that, I think, is the barrier to like any further expansion. No matter how much Trump may talk about these things, it's like the barrier that he's going to come up against is the debt. The debt is going to come due, and because as the guy I mentioned earlier, Ron Paul, he keeps saying America's broke. He's like, we're broke. We've got no way to pay for this stuff. And in terms of talking about which states are likely to leave, I think it's going to be in those states which are preparing for it right now. I mean, you mentioned California; they are actively preparing for that. You've got the Collexit movement. They just launched an initiative to start the process of getting a referendum on the ballot, which, if it passes and the people endorse it, California then has to form a commission to study how independence would be brought about and to send someone to D.C. to negotiate separation terms with DC. You look on the right wing side. Texas, I think Texas is like full steam ahead. I mean, the Texas nationalist movement has been pushing this for a long time. They've got substantial support in their state government now, in the state legislature, for people to want to push for a Texit referendum, which they shamelessly borrowed that from Brexit that you guys had over there in Britain, and so I look at Texas and I'm like, they're very likely to happen. In New Hampshire, you also have their movement is very well organized, decentralized, but very organized. And they're slowly gaining control themselves in the state legislature. And they've had a number of bills proposed to take back state sovereignty, which are key steps to get independence. And then you also have Louisiana. Their movement just started last year, but they're already making substantial moves. And there's already a very strong sentiment for the what you call it. There's already a very substantial independent spirit in Louisiana, I guess is the best way I can put it. And I've been told by the people who run the Louisiana independence movement that basically the movement has, shall we say, they said that they have people in their state government who are already sympathetic to Louisiana independence, but they're like, we need grassroots support before we can come out publicly. So there's a lot of these. So I think if you were to come down with it, California, Texas, New Hampshire, Louisiana. I think Alaska also is also leaning that way, because Alaska was not given the independence option which they were required to have in the 1960s under the United Nations self-determination rules that were put forward at that time. And I know a lot of Alaskans don't like that. And also, you're getting hints from certain other states, like I know the political leadership in Florida seems to be taking steps for Florida to survive becoming independent if D.C. completely comes apart. So I think, in summing up, that's probably how I would say it, is that those are probably the states we need to watch the most.
Yeah, and I would certainly say the question of the secession of individual US states from DC, or the reorganization of the US, should very much be a matter for the American people, for the people of those individual states. And I know that there is always, if you look historically at the role of Britain and France, very unhelpful in terms of the War of Independence, obviously from Great Britain, but in terms of that sort of like meddling and not leaving the US alone and so on. So do you see foreign interference? Because we know that there are foreign powers who are very invested in what's happening on a constitutional level, state and nation formation level in the US. But do you see that as playing a role at all as things begin to, as these movements begin to grow?
Well, from what we've seen so far, I mean, in the movements that I've dealt with and talked with and all that, they don't want. I mean, they've rejected all notion of foreign help or interference or anything like that. They want no part of it. In fact, I'm going to quote here real quick a comment that the leader of the Texas nationalist movement made when somebody posed that question to him in response, ironically enough, to to comments that the Russian government official Dmitry Medvedev made regarding Texas and the border standoff a year ago. And this is what Miller said in response to that. And I'm quoting from a news article here, so because they're basically summing up what Miller said. Said, quote, Miller said TNM, Texas Nationalist Movement's goals, were very different from outside attempts by state actors to shoehorn themselves in the conversation for some geopolitical aims, end quote. Right?
Yeah.
I get that same mentality from every movement that I've talked to date. And I've only heard of one
And
movement that
we would say exactly the same thing in a Scottish context as well.
Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
it seems like it's a very useful club for knocking secession movements over the head with.
Yeah,
that,
but if I might
but on the
quickly,
other hand, yes, on the other hand, the challenge is you also don't want to spike or have negative relations with these with countries around the world that one day you may be interacting with bilaterally as an independent state. And
right.
so it's about, for me, I would say, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but sort of like positioning yourself as neutrally as possible on some of these geopolitical issues. But maybe you have a different take on it.
That's something from what I understand from these different movements, and I kind of agree with this mentality, is that it's like because of the domestic challenges that already exist that secession is supposed to give us the opportunity to solve. It's like a lot of these movements are not going to have time to meddle on the world stage.
Mhm.
At best, they're going to be focused on solving their own problems and making sure they have good relations with their immediate neighbors. Like I know this is another thing I heard from the Texas Nationalist Movement. They had, I guess, somebody in the Mexican government made some crack against the Texas effort, and their response was they said, look, they said, we're in active discussions with a northern Mexico secession movement, and we're going to basically try to establish good relations with them because we see where Mexico is going. So it's like, so we don't really care about what you're saying about us. It's like, we're more concerned with building up good relations with this movement next door, right across the river. It's like, and that's kind of the furthest that I've seen that they really concern themselves with, like, the international picture, so to speak. Is like, because again, a lot of these movements, again, they're like, we're solving domestic issues. It's like we're not interested in the international thing. It's like these other groups is like they need to do what they need to do. Is like we will definitely be friends with them if they want to be. We can engage in trade and all that, but we're not going to interfere with
Mhm.
their effort per se. It's like we're going to. I mean, I know in terms of, I know the Texas Nationalist Movement has spoken very highly of your guys' movement in Scotland. They've spoken very highly of Scottish nationalist efforts. Okay, in a friendly way. They're not trying to
Yeah.
dictate to you guys what you need to do. They're just saying they're celebrating your successes. They are, wishing for your success, and they're saying, "Hey, it's like when we're both players on the world stage, let's talk as friends." You know, and things like that.
And I'm sure, if Texas was to become independent, its number one foreign relationship, the one that would matter, is with the rest of the United States,
True.
and that is always in the background. We have the same dynamic here. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the mistake that Ukraine maybe perhaps made is, you look at countries like Kazakhstan, for instance, that made a huge effort to keep good relations with Russia following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And other post Soviet countries have had very strained relations. And I've learned an awful lot from that. For me, it's always seemed as though, for Scotland following independence, the number one relationship is going to be with England.
Yeah.
It's going to be with the rest of the UK. But you've been very kind and generous following us online, and we appreciate the attention. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I wonder, maybe just finally to tie things up, do you have any thoughts on Scotland and what was the origin of your interest in Scotland and Scottish independence? Do you want to say a little bit about that? I mean,
Yeah. Well, I was first made aware of your guys' movement back in 2014 during the independence referendum. I know I was rooting for you guys real hard, insofar as I could at the time. It's like, and and as I learned more about it, I was like, it was like, yeah, it's like they've got to. I knew Scotland had been an independent country at one point during its history, and I mean, I'm not an expert on this field, but it seemed like the Scots' independence was taken away through nefarious means. It seemed to me, at least.
Hmm.
So, and that's a common theme I've seen a lot with a lot of these what you call empires. It's like the empires, usurped independence of their neighbors or other countries. Anyway, but I have been following what's been going on ever since. I mean, I've seen what's happened with the SNP and all that, and I've had some conversations. Well, actually, I should back up here. My interest was made more keen by an article that appeared in the European Conservative by someone who I believe supports your group in particular, and that's Dr. Paul Gilfallen of Queen Margaret
Yes.
University. Yeah,
Hmm.
and I've had him on twice on my show to discuss these things, and so I've been made aware a lot of what some of the intricacies of your guys' efforts, and I've been watching with very keen interest because to me my attitude is like because we have I mean I don't know if your audience is acquainted with a term that's I think it's originated in America called the deep state, which is these elite
Hmm.
ruling classes trying to pull strings and everything, and make this international cabal, this globalist idea. And my studies have led me to believe that one of the hubs for this deep state is in London,
Hmm.
is in addition to DC and Brussels and Davos and a couple other places. And so that's kind of led me to believe is like one of the ways that we really kick off self-determination is that in these areas where these hubs where the deep state exists, we have to break apart their structure at the local level to give everybody else a chance to thrive.
Hmm.
And that's been another big mentality of mine. And so and then looking over just the situation in the British Isles in general, seeing that not only are you guys in Scotland have a very high support level for Scottish nationalism
Yep.
compared to some other areas, and then I'm seeing it growing in Wales, and I'm seeing in Northern Ireland that there's active conversations being had about Northern Ireland splitting off and rejoining the rest of Ireland.
Hmm.
I look at all that and I'm just like, okay, and then seeing Britain having substantial economic issues similar to what DC's dealing with. I'm like, I see America and Britain being on the same trajectory.
Hmm.
And I'm like, there's a chance here. There's an opportunity here. We can bring down globalist structures and everybody can thrive. Okay.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how I look at the whole thing there. But again, I have a soft spot for Scotland in the sense that you guys are way ahead of the game, and you guys may be the ones leading the way and showing your relatives in Wales and Northern Ireland and parts of England, the way out, and to just reassert self governance and take it back and dictate your own future. So and that's kind of where a lot of my interest in Scotland is focused. Is that it's like I look at you guys as kind of the bellwether to help bring this about.
Well, we would love to be first or next. Secession is happening around the world. There are all sorts of success stories, I guess, if you want to put it that way, in recent
Yeah.
years. Whether it's East Timor, South Sudan, it's something that is a bit of something of an underlying trend that we're seeing in global politics. Um,
Yes.
well, it's been an absolute honor. I wouldn't want to take too much more of your time. I'm sure our listeners will have appreciated that. Just to say a little bit finally, if anyone is wanting to follow you, we're going to put all the links as we do in the description to this video. But where should people check out? Where's the best place to go to follow you and your work?
Well, the site where we have everything linked is called keepgovlocal.com. So if you
Okay.
go there, keepgovlocal.com, that's where everything's linked. If you want to follow us on social media, our social media links are at the bottom of that main web page. You can just go there, click on them. We're on Twitter, we're on Gab, we're on Minds, MeWe, Rumble, not YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute. We're on a lot of the alternative media things. We don't have a presence on Facebook or YouTube because of their censorship inclinations, unfortunately. But all those other ones were there. And again, you can watch our podcast there because we linked all our episodes there. Oh, we're on Substack as well. If you go to State of Division on Substack, we're there and we publish everything there. There's actually an article from Dr. Gilfillan on there as well. I published an article from him. So you guys can go there.
We've been honored to have Dr. Gilfillan speak at our annual Congress, as we term it, the annual Conference of Sovereignty. And so, yeah, it's a really neat link. We have a huge amount of time for Dr. Gilfillan as well. So he's a really important thinker, I would say, in this area. So thank you very much. Anyone listening who is not familiar with sovereignty, just to say finally, you can follow us at sovereignty.scot. And if you are on X, look for the hashtag vote sovereignty, one word, vote sovereignty. You can find us there. So please do follow. Grant, it's been an honor. Thank you ever so much for your time. And we look forward to speaking again with you very shortly.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.